The millionaire arrives at the hospital and finds his injured mother and his frightened baby son. She pleads in desperation, "Save us! Don't send us back to her." The daughter-in-law, once seen as an angel, hid a cruel mind and a monstrous plan. But when the mother and the baby are kidnapped, he discovers just how far love and hate can lead. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The rain was falling hard over New York City on that June morning. Michael Taylor was in his office on the 32nd floor, reviewing contracts and spreadsheets, when the phone rang. It was almost 3 in the morning. He looked at the illuminated screen and saw the number for Mount Sinai Hospital. His heart raced before he even answered. The doctor's voice on the other end was direct yet restrained. Eleanor, his mother, had been admitted to the emergency room with severe pain and signs of extreme exhaustion, and little Gabriel, his son of only 2 years, was with her, frightened and crying non-stop. Michael barely hung up. He grabbed his keys, ran down and got into his car with his tie still loose and his shirt wrinkled. The wet streets reflected the city lights as he sped down Park Avenue. Confused thoughts flooded his mind. Eleanor had always been a strong, independent woman, full of life. How had she reached this point? And Gabriel? Why was he at the hospital with her in the middle of the night? Wasn't Victoria, his wife, at home? Where was she? Upon arriving at the hospital, Michael went straight to the emergency wing. A nurse led him to one of the rooms. He opened the door slowly, and what he saw made him stop in the middle of the hallway. Eleanor was lying on the bed, pale, trembling, with sunken eyes and thin hands clutching the sheet as if clinging to life. Beside her, in a nurse's lap, Gabriel was crying softly, his little eyes red and swollen. Michael approached his mother. She turned her face slowly, and upon seeing him, tears began to stream down. He held her hand, feeling how cold and fragile it was. The nurse handed Gabriel into his arms. The boy clung to his father tightly, hiding his little face in his neck, still sobbing. Michael couldn't understand. He looked at the doctor who entered shortly after. She was carrying a folder with exams and reports. With a serious but careful voice, she began to explain. Eleanor showed signs of malnutrition, severe dehydration, acute emotional stress, and marks on her body that indicated recent falls. Gabriel, in turn, was in a state of emotional shock, with signs of emotional neglect and episodes of prolonged, inconsolable crying. Michael felt the ground give way beneath him. What did she mean? His mother had been living with him for 2 years, ever since Mary, his first wife, had passed away so suddenly, leaving him alone with a newborn baby. Victoria had entered his life at that difficult moment, offering support, care, stability. She presented herself as a kind, patient woman, willing to help, and he, completely lost and exhausted, accepted that help with open arms. 6 months later, they were married. Michael had always believed that Victoria took good care of his mother and Gabriel. He worked too much, spent entire days away, traveled constantly. He trusted her. But now, looking at his mother's condition and the fear in his son's eyes, he began to realize that something was terribly wrong. Eleanor held her son's hand tighter. Her lips trembled. She tried to speak, but the words came out low, broken. Michael leaned in to hear better. She whispered something that made him freeze. She asked not to go back home. She begged him to protect Gabriel. She said there were things he didn't know, things she had hidden so as not to worry him, not to destroy the fragile peace he was trying to build after losing Mary. Michael felt anger rising. He asked directly what was happening. Eleanor closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to tell her story. Her voice was weak, but each word carried immense weight. Victoria was not the woman she pretended to be. Inside the house, away from his eyes, she was cold, cruel, controlling. She treated Eleanor like a burden, ignored her needs, isolated her. In her own room for hours, left her without proper meals. And Gabriel, little Gabriel, was constantly scolded, ignored, left crying alone in his crib. Eleanor confessed that she endured it all in silence because she was afraid that if she said anything, Victoria would take it out on the boy even more. She tried to protect her grandson, taking him to her room whenever she could, calming him, singing softly to him to sleep. But Victoria noticed and reacted with calculated coldness. She forbade visitors, ordered Elsa, the loyal housekeeper, to keep quiet, and threatened that any complaint would have serious consequences. Michael was in shock. How had he not noticed? How did he let this happen under his own roof? He hugged his mother carefully, feeling her fragile body tremble. Gabriel continued to cling to him, as if he knew he was finally safe. The doctor suggested that Eleanor be admitted for observation and treatment. Michael agreed immediately. He also asked for Gabriel to be examined by a child psychologist. He wouldn't leave until he was sure they were both okay. While waiting for the results of additional tests, Michael called home. Victoria answered on the third ring, her voice sleepy and irritated. She asked where he was, why he had disappeared in the middle of the night. Michael, controlling his fury, just said that his mother and Gabriel were at the hospital and that she should come there immediately. Victoria hesitated. She asked what had happened. Michael didn't answer. He just repeated that she should come. He hung up before she could say anything else. 40 minutes later, Victoria arrived at the hospital. She was impeccably dressed, made up, with her hair styled. She seemed calm, but Michael noticed something in her eyes, a glint of concern, perhaps fear. She approached, tried to hug him, but he pulled away. He asked her directly what had happened to his mother and his son. Victoria assumed a posture of surprise and concern. She said she knew nothing, that Eleanor was fine when she went to bed, that Gabriel had slept peacefully. Michael stared at her. He then asked why his mother was in that condition, why Gabriel was terrified. Victoria looked away. She began to make vague excuses. She said Eleanor was stubborn, that she wouldn't accept help, that she insisted on doing things herself and ended up getting hurt. As for Gabriel, she claimed he was a difficult child, that he cried over anything, that she did her best, but it was complicated to deal with such a sensitive child. Michael felt the rage explode inside him, but he controlled himself. It wasn't the time for confrontations. It was time to protect the ones he loved. He told Victoria that he would stay at the hospital with his mother and son, that she could go back home. Victoria tried to argue, but he was firm. She left, but before she went, she looked at Eleanor for a second. It was a cold, threatening look. Michael saw it, and that confirmed everything. In the following hours, Michael stayed by his mother's side. Gabriel finally fell asleep in his arms, exhausted. Eleanor, sedated and resting, seemed a little better. Michael used the silence to think. How had he been so blind? How had he not seen the signs? He now remembered small details he had ignored. Eleanor losing weight, Gabriel becoming quieter, Elsa always with her head down, avoiding his gaze. Elsa. He needed to talk to her. He took out his phone and called the house. Elsa answered with a hesitant voice. Michael got straight to the point. He asked for the truth about what was happening inside that house. Elsa began to cry on the other end of the line. She said she wanted to tell him sooner, but she was afraid. Victoria threatened her constantly. She said that if she opened her mouth, she would make Michael fire her, that she would destroy her reputation, that no one would believe her. Elsa poured everything out. She told him about the times Victoria locked Eleanor in her room for hours, about the way she yelled at Gabriel when he cried, about how she manipulated everything to seem perfect when Michael was around, about how she forced Elsa to lie, to hide things, to pretend everything was fine. Michael thanked Elsa and told her not to worry. He said none of this was her fault and that he would handle everything. He hung up and just sat there in that uncomfortable hospital chair, holding his son in his arms, watching his mother sleep. He felt a mixture of guilt, anger, and determination. He had failed, but now he wouldn't fail again. When the day broke, Michael already had a plan. First, ensure that Eleanor and Gabriel were safe. Second, find out exactly who Victoria was, because something told him there was much more behind that perfect facade. The hospital's social worker showed up mid-morning. She was a middle-aged woman with an attentive gaze and a firm voice. She introduced herself as Dr. Beatrice, and said she needed to talk to him about the situation. Michael accompanied her to a private room. Gabriel was still asleep, now in a crib the ward had provided. Dr. Beatrice was direct. She explained that cases like this were delicate and required a thorough investigation. She asked about the household routine, about Victoria, about how it all started. Michael told her everything. He spoke about Mary's death, about how he met Victoria, about how she inserted herself into his life so quickly and efficiently. He talked about how he, blinded by grief and work, trusted her completely. Dr. Beatrice took notes on everything. At the end, she suggested that Michael consider finding a lawyer specializing in family law. She also recommended that he install discreet cameras in the house, should he return there with his family, and, most importantly, that he keep Eleanor and Gabriel away from Victoria until everything was clarified. Michael agreed to everything. He left that room with his mind racing. He returned to his mother's room and found her awake. She looked at him with those tired eyes, but there was something different now. A relief, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Michael sat beside her and held her hand. He promised he would take care of everything, that she and Gabriel would be safe, that he would never let anyone hurt them again. Eleanor smiled weakly and squeezed her son's hand. That afternoon, Michael made a few calls. First to his personal lawyer, Mr. Henry Miller, an experienced and discreet man. He explained the situation and asked for guidance. Mr. Miller was clear. It was necessary to gather evidence, document everything, and act with caution. Michael also called a trusted friend who worked in private security. He asked him to install hidden cameras in the house and to investigate Victoria's past. Meanwhile, Victoria was calling constantly, sending messages, asking when he would be back, if Eleanor was okay, if Gabriel was better. Michael responded with short, evasive answers. He said everything was under control, that he would be back soon, but he gave no details. At the end of the day, Michael received a call from Paul, his security friend. He had started investigating Victoria and already had some preliminary information. He suggested they meet in person. Michael asked Elsa to stay at the hospital with Eleanor and Gabriel for a few hours and went out to meet Paul. They met at a discreet cafe in Greenwich Village. Paul opened his laptop and began to show what he had discovered. Victoria wasn't exactly who she claimed to be. Her full name was Victoria Sampson Adams, but before that she used another surname. There were records of her passing through other cities, links to people of dubious reputation, and histories of brief relationships with wealthy men. Paul also discovered something disturbing. Victoria had 3 sisters, and all of them had a similar pattern: whirlwind relationships with older men, situations of financial control, sudden disappearances. It was as if it were a strategy, a way of survival, or worse, a calculated way of life. Michael sat in silence, absorbing it all. Paul continued. He said he would need more time to confirm everything, but the signs were clear. Victoria was dangerous, not in a physically violent sense, but in an emotional, manipulative, psychological sense. She knew how to enter people's lives, how to gain trust, how to control situations. Michael thanked his friend and asked him to keep investigating. He returned to the hospital with a heavy mind. He entered the room and saw Gabriel awake, playing with a teddy bear the nurse had given him. The boy smiled when he saw his father. That smile, so rare in recent months, broke Michael's heart. How had he not noticed his son was suffering? Eleanor was also better. She had eaten a little, talked with the nurses, even laughed at some silly joke one of them told. Michael sat beside her and told her, in summary, what he had discovered. Eleanor didn't seem surprised. She said she had always felt something strange about Victoria, a coldness disguised as kindness, a calculation behind every gesture. Michael asked why she hadn't said anything before. Eleanor sighed. She said she had tried, a few times, subtly, but Michael was so lost, so focused on surviving his grief and his work, that he didn't want to listen. And later, when she realized, Victoria had control over everything, she was afraid. Afraid that by speaking up, things would get worse. Michael hugged his mother and apologized. Apologized for not seeing, for not protecting, for being so absent. Eleanor caressed her son's face and said that now was the time to move forward, to protect Gabriel, to rebuild. That night, Michael slept in an armchair next to his mother's bed, with Gabriel lying on a makeshift mattress on the floor. For the first time in months, he felt he was doing the right thing, that he was present, that he was protecting who really mattered. But he knew this was just the beginning. Victoria wouldn't give up easily. She had invested time, energy, strategy into this relationship, and people like her don't accept losing control without a fight. Michael looked out the hospital window. The city of New York, immense and chaotic, continued to spin outside. Millions of lives, millions of stories. And there, in that hospital room, his own battle was beginning. A battle not against the world, but against the shadows he himself had let into his life. He picked up his phone and wrote a message to his lawyer. He needed to start the separation proceedings. But before that, he needed to ensure his family's safety. Mr. Miller replied quickly. He said he was already preparing everything and that they would meet the next morning. Michael put his phone away and closed his eyes. He knew the next few days would be difficult. He knew he would have to face Victoria, that he would have to deal with revelations he might prefer not to know. But now, he was no longer alone. He had his mother. He had Gabriel. And he had the determination of a man who had finally woken up. In the next room, a nurse made her notes. In the hallway, the hospital continued its nightly rhythm, and out there, somewhere in New York City, Victoria was planning her next move. Because for her, this wasn't the end. It was just a change in strategy, and she had always been very good at adapting. The morning came with a shy sun trying to break through the grey clouds over New York City. Michael woke up with a stiff neck, the result of a poorly slept night in the hospital armchair. Gabriel was still sleeping soundly, wrapped in the blanket the nurse had brought. Eleanor was awake, looking out the window with a thoughtful expression. Michael got up and went to her. He asked how she had slept. She smiled faintly and said it had been the best night in a long time. For the first time in months, she had slept without fear, without having to be alert, without having to worry about Gabriel crying alone in the other room. The doctor came in to do the morning rounds. He said Eleanor was responding well to treatment, but it would be important to keep her under observation for a few more days. Michael agreed readily. There was no rush. The important thing was to ensure she recovered completely. After breakfast, which Michael made a point of having right there with his mother and son, he received a call from Mr. Henry Miller. The lawyer was in the hospital lobby and asked to meet. Michael asked Elsa, who had arrived early, to stay with Eleanor and Gabriel, and went down to talk. Mr. Miller was a man in his 60s, with white hair, an elegant posture, and a firm voice. He greeted Michael with a handshake and suggested they talk in a more private place. They went to the hospital cafeteria and sat at a secluded table. The lawyer got straight to the point. He said he had reviewed the situation and that it was crucial to act with caution and intelligence. Victoria, from what Michael had reported and from what was beginning to be investigated, was a strategic person. It wouldn't be easy to simply kick her out of the house or file for divorce without consequences. It was necessary to build a solid case, gather evidence, protect assets, and, most importantly, secure full custody of Gabriel. Michael listened intently. Mr. Miller explained that legally, Victoria had no rights over Gabriel, as she was not the biological mother, nor was there an adoption process. But she could claim abandonment, negligence on his part, and try to use the situation to her advantage. That's why it was crucial to document everything. The conditions in which Eleanor and Gabriel were found, Elsa's accounts, the medical and social reports. The lawyer also suggested that Michael avoid direct confrontations, that he act with coldness and planning. Victoria could not realize that he was preparing for a definitive separation. It was important to maintain the appearance of normalcy until everything was properly arranged. Michael agreed, although he knew it would be difficult to feign naturalness around her. The anger, the disappointment, the feeling of betrayal were emotions that burned inside him. But he understood the strategy. It wasn't about cowardice, but about protection. Protection for his mother, his son, and himself. Mr. Miller handed him a folder with documents. They were contracts Michael needed to review. authorizations for the lawyer to act on his behalf, and requests to freeze joint accounts and protect assets. Michael signed everything right there, using the cafeteria table for support. Before leaving, the lawyer gave a warning. He said Michael should be prepared for the worst. People like Victoria, when they realize they are losing control, can react in unpredictable ways. Not necessarily with physical aggression, but with emotional manipulation, blackmail, and attempts to turn the situation in their favor. Michael had to be alert, vigilant. After Mr. Miller left, Michael sat there for a few minutes, watching the bustle of the cafeteria. People came and went, carrying coffees, talking on the phone, living their normal lives. He envied that normality, that simplicity. His life, which had seemed so organized and controlled, had turned out to be a disguised chaos. He returned to the room and found Gabriel playing with some toys Elsa had brought from home. The boy was more lively, more present. Eleanor watched her grandson with a smile on her face. It was as if, away from that house, away from Victoria, everyone could finally breathe. Michael picked up his phone and saw several messages from Victoria. She asked when he would be back, said she was worried, that she missed him. There was a more recent message sent just a few minutes ago, saying she would stop by the hospital in the afternoon to visit them. Michael felt his stomach turn, but he remembered the lawyer's words. He couldn't show open hostility. He replied neutrally, just saying they would be there. Eleanor noticed the tension on her son's face. She asked what was wrong. Michael explained that Victoria was coming to visit and that it was important for everyone to act naturally. Eleanor nodded, but he saw the fear return to her eyes. Michael held his mother's hand and assured her that nothing would happen, that he would be there the whole time. At 3 in the afternoon, Victoria arrived. She entered the room with a gentle smile, carrying a bouquet of flowers and a bag of sweets. She greeted Eleanor with false concern, asking how she was. Eleanor replied reservedly, thanking her for the flowers. Victoria then turned to Gabriel. She tried to pick him up, but the boy clung to Michael, hiding his face. Victoria disguised her frustration with a forced laugh. She commented that Gabriel was just getting used to things, that it was normal after spending the night in the hospital. Michael watched her every move, every word, every gesture. Now that he knew the truth, he saw what he had ignored before. The falseness in her smile, the coldness in her eyes, the disguised tension. Victoria was an actress, and a very good one. She pulled up a chair and sat by the bed. She began to talk about how worried she had been, how she didn't understand what had happened, how she wanted to help. Michael interrupted her. He said the doctor had explained that Eleanor was suffering from extreme stress and malnutrition, that it would be necessary to investigate the causes. Victoria feigned surprise. She said Eleanor had always been stubborn, that she refused food, that she wouldn't accept help. Eleanor remained silent, but Michael saw tears forming in her eyes. He held his mother's hand and told Victoria that from now on he would personally take care of her diet and well-being. Victoria smiled, but there was something dangerous in that smile. She asked if Michael was implying something, if he was blaming her for anything. Michael kept his voice calm. He said he wasn't blaming anyone, just ensuring that his mother and son received the necessary care. The atmosphere grew tense. Victoria quickly changed the subject. She asked when they would be returning home. Michael said Eleanor would stay for a few more days of observation and that he would stay at the hospital with her. Victoria insisted. She said there was no need for that Elsa could stay, that he needed to rest, to work, to take care of his business. Michael was firm. He said his business could wait, that his priority now was his family. Victoria didn't like the answer. She stood up, said she had to go take care of some things and that she would be back the next day. She said goodbye with a cold kiss on Michael's cheek and left. As soon as the door closed, Eleanor let out the breath she had been holding. Michael realized she had been tense the entire time. Gabriel, who had been quiet in his father's lap, began to relax too. It was incredible how a 2-year-old child could already sense the negative energy of that woman. That night, after Gabriel had fallen asleep and Eleanor was resting, Michael received a call from Paul, the friend investigating Victoria. He had discovered something important and wanted to meet as soon as possible. Michael asked Elsa to stay at the hospital again and went out to meet Paul at a discreet restaurant in Soho. Paul was waiting at a table in the back. He had a serious expression. As soon as Michael sat down, Paul opened a folder with documents and photos. What he had discovered was disturbing. Victoria and her 3 sisters, Julia, Patricia, and Renee, grew up together in an orphanage in rural Ohio. They were all adopted by different families but kept in touch over the years. And all of them, absolutely all of them, had a pattern of relationships with older men, situations of financial control, and sudden disappearances. Paul showed old newspaper clippings, reports from closed investigations, police records. There were cases of men who had lost fortunes, others who simply vanished from the cities where they lived, some who fell into deep depression. There was no concrete proof of crimes, but there was a clear pattern, a pattern of systematic manipulation. Michael felt a chill. He asked if there was anything connecting Victoria to his family specifically. Paul hesitated. He said he was still investigating, but there was an intriguing lead. Richard, Michael's brother, had had a brief involvement with one of Victoria's sisters a few years ago, Julia. Michael was shocked. Richard had always been emotionally fragile, financially dependent on his older brother. He lived with Michael's help, who paid his bills, supported his erratic lifestyle. And now he discovered that Richard had been involved with someone from Victoria's circle. Paul continued. He said he was trying to locate Richard to talk to him, but he had been missing for a few weeks. Michael felt the weight of that information. Could Richard be involved in all this? Could he have been manipulated by those women? Paul suggested that Michael be extra careful. If there really was a connection between Richard and Victoria's family, things were much more complex than they seemed. Michael agreed and asked Paul to continue investigating. He also asked him to try to find Richard as soon as possible. Returning to the hospital, Michael was mentally and emotionally exhausted. He entered the room quietly so as not to wake Gabriel and Eleanor. He sat in the armchair and just stayed there, looking at the 2 of them sleeping. He thought of Mary, his first wife. He remembered how sweet, genuine, and full of life she was. He remembered the day she passed, leaving him alone with a baby in his arms. Michael had always believed that Mary's passing had been sudden, a tragedy of life. But now, with everything he was discovering, a terrible doubt began to surface. What if it wasn't just a tragedy? What if there was something more? He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. He couldn't start imagining things without proof. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The next morning, Mr. Miller called again. He said he had obtained a court order to have security cameras installed in Michael's house, arguing the need for family protection. He had also officially started the separation process, but discreetly, so Victoria would not be notified yet. Michael thanked him and asked how long it would take until everything was resolved. Mr. Miller was honest. He said it would depend on many factors, but he would do his best to speed up the process. The important thing was not to let Victoria realize until it was too late for her to react. Over the next few days, Michael maintained his routine at the hospital. Victoria showed up daily for short visits, always trying to appear concerned and helpful. But Michael saw through the mask. He saw the impatience in her eyes, the irritation when he said he would stay longer at the hospital, the frustration when she tried to get close to Gabriel, and the boy refused. Eleanor was getting better every day. The doctors were impressed with her recovery. She started eating well again, talking, smiling. It was as if, free from that daily oppression, she had been reborn. Gabriel was also different, more animated, more communicative, laughing at the nurse's jokes. One afternoon, while Michael was alone in the hallway answering work emails, one of the social workers approached him. It was Dr. Beatrice. She asked to speak with him privately. They went to an empty meeting room. Dr. Beatrice said she had conducted a detailed assessment of the case and that her reports recommended that Eleanor and Gabriel not return to the house while Victoria was there. She explained that, although there was no evidence of physical aggression, there were clear signs of emotional abuse and neglect. And that was enough for an official recommendation. Michael was relieved. That report would be crucial for the separation process and for securing definitive custody of Gabriel. He thanked Dr. Beatrice and asked for a copy of everything. That night, Michael made a decision. He would not return to that house. He would rent a temporary apartment, take Eleanor and Gabriel there as soon as she was discharged, and only return to the mansion to get his belongings when Victoria wasn't there. It was time to break away completely. He called Mr. Miller and communicated his decision. The lawyer agreed it was the best strategy. He also informed him that Richard had been located. He was in a cheap hotel in Queens, apparently without money, avoiding contact with the family. Paul managed to talk to him and set up a meeting for the next day. Michael asked to be part of that meeting. He needed to look his brother in the eyes and understand what was really happening. The next day, Michael left Eleanor and Gabriel in Elsa's care and went to meet Richard. The hotel was simple, almost run down, on a busy street near Queens. Paul was waiting in the lobby. They went up together to the room on the 3rd floor. Richard opened the door. He was unrecognizable. Thin, with deep dark circles under his eyes, an unshaven beard, wrinkled clothes. He looked like a broken man. Upon seeing Michael, he started to cry. He said he was sorry, that he was ashamed, that he had done something terrible. Michael entered the room and sat on the only available chair. Richard stood, leaning against the wall. Paul remained near the door. Michael asked Richard to tell him everything. Richard began to speak between sobs. He said he had met Julia, Victoria's sister, about 3 years ago. She was charming, attentive, seemed genuinely interested in him. They had a brief but intense relationship. Julia asked a lot about the family, about Michael, about the business. Richard, naive and lonely, told her everything. When Mary got pregnant and then passed away suddenly, Richard was in shock. Julia comforted him. It was around that time that she mentioned having a sister, Victoria, who had also gone through losses and could help Michael. Richard, wanting to help his brother and impressed by Julia's supposed kindness, arranged a casual meeting between Michael and Victoria. Michael felt his blood run cold. Everything had been planned from the beginning. Victoria didn't enter his life by chance. It was a calculated strategy, architected with the help of his own brother. Richard continued. He said that after Michael and Victoria got married, Julia began to change. She became cold, distant. She asked Richard for money, often. He, without the courage to ask Michael for more, started selling his own belongings, borrowing from loan sharks. Julia disappeared a few months ago, leaving him in debt and desperate. It was then that Richard became suspicious. He researched Julia, discovered her sisters, found the patterns, and he realized he had put his own brother in danger. But he was so scared, so ashamed, that he couldn't tell him. He ran away, hid, tried to disappear. Michael was trying to process it all. His own brother, even if unconsciously, had been the gateway to this nightmare. But looking at Richard, seeing his condition, Michael realized he was also a victim of his own weakness, yes, but a victim nonetheless. Michael stood up and approached his brother. Richard expected anger, accusation, rejection, but Michael hugged him. He said he understood, that he didn't blame him, that they would solve this together. Richard collapsed in tears in his brother's arms. Paul watched everything in silence. After that moment, he suggested that Richard officially cooperate with the investigation, that he tell the authorities everything, that he help build the case against Victoria and her sisters. Richard readily agreed. Michael took Richard to a better hotel, paid for his stay, gave him money to eat and take care of himself. He also scheduled an appointment with a psychologist. Richard needed professional help. Returning to the hospital that afternoon, Michael felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief, determination. But above all, he felt he was finally understanding the scope of the problem. And with that understanding came the power to act. Eleanor was discharged from the hospital a week later. The doctors were pleased with her recovery and released her with recommendations for outpatient follow-up. Michael, true to his decision, did not take his mother or Gabriel back to the mansion. He had rented a spacious apartment on the Upper West Side, a quiet and safe neighborhood, far from Victoria's eyes. The apartment had 3 bedrooms, a large living room with a balcony and plenty of natural light. Michael hired a nurse to assist Eleanor during the day, and a trusted nanny, recommended by Elsa, to help with Gabriel. He also installed security cameras in every room and at the building's entrance. He wouldn't take any more risks. Victoria, of course, did not take the news well. When Michael finally informed her that they would not be returning home, she exploded. She called several times, sent furious messages, demanded explanations. Michael remained calm. He just said he needed some time to take care of his mother and reorganize things, that they would talk in person soon. But Victoria was no fool. She realized something had changed. Michael was different. More distant, firmer, more in control, and that put her on alert. People like Victoria had a keen instinct for detecting when they were losing the game. A few days later, Michael received an unexpected call. It was from a woman who identified herself as Dr. Lucy Fisher, a pathologist at the medical examiner's office. She said she needed to talk to him about a delicate matter related to his late wife, Mary. Michael felt his heart pound. He asked what it was about. Dr. Fisher asked to meet in person. Michael agreed and they scheduled for the next day. That night, Michael barely slept. The pathologist's words echoed in his mind. What could she have discovered about Mary? Was it possible that his darkest suspicions were correct? The next day, Michael went to the medical examiner's office, accompanied by Mr. Miller. Dr. Fisher received them in her office, a functional space with shelves full of files and a computer on the desk. She was a middle-aged woman with a serious gaze and a professional demeanor. Dr. Fisher began by explaining that she had been contacted by a colleague who worked at the hospital where Mary had passed away. This colleague was reviewing old cases when she found inconsistencies in Mary's death report. Concerned, she asked Dr. Fisher to re-evaluate the case. Michael was tense. Mr. Miller took notes. Dr. Fisher continued. She explained that, at the time, Mary's cause of death was recorded as complications during pregnancy, a tragic but not uncommon event. However, upon reviewing the archived toxicology reports, she found something alarming. There were traces of substances that should not have been present in the system of a healthy pregnant woman. Substances that, in accumulated doses, could cause the symptoms Mary had presented before her death. Progressive, weakness, constant nausea, mental confusion, sudden collapse. Michael felt his world fall apart again. He asked if that meant what he was thinking. Dr. Fisher hesitated, choosing her words carefully. She said she couldn't state anything categorically without a more in-depth investigation, but the evidence suggested gradual intentional poisoning. Mr. Miller intervened. He asked if a definitive analysis would be possible. Dr. Fisher said yes, but a court order would be needed for exhumation and new tests. Mr. Miller assured her he would arrange everything. Michael left that meeting completely shaken. Mary, his first wife, Gabriel's mother, had not died from a tragedy. She had been taken from him, and everything pointed to Victoria. He returned to the apartment on the Upper West Side, still in shock from the revelation. Eleanor noticed her son's state as soon as he walked in. She asked what had happened. Michael sat next to her on the sofa and told her everything. Eleanor turned pale. Her eyes filled with tears. She held her son's hands and said something that made everything make sense. She recounted that in the months before Mary passed away, Victoria was already frequenting the house. She would show up with various excuses, always offering to help, to keep Mary company, to prepare special teas and meals for the pregnant woman. Michael remembered. It was true. Victoria was already around. He had forgotten that detail. At the time, he thought it was kind of her. He thought she was just a caring person helping a pregnant woman. But now, knowing everything, he realized it was part of the plan. Eleanor continued. She said she had found some things strange at the time. Mary complained of odd tastes in the food, of feeling weaker after certain meals that Victoria prepared, but everyone attributed it to pregnancy hormones, to the common cravings and aversions of expectant mothers. No one imagined it could be something worse. Michael was devastated. He felt an overwhelming guilt. How had he not noticed? How did he let that woman into his life, into his home near Mary? The anger he felt for Victoria was now accompanied by an even greater anger at himself. Eleanor hugged her son. She said he couldn't blame himself, that Victoria was an experienced manipulator, that she fooled everyone, that no one could have predicted it. But Michael knew it would take a long time to forgive himself. Mr. Miller called 2 days later. He had obtained the court order for the exhumation. The procedure would be carried out in a week. Michael authorized everything. He needed the truth, no matter how painful. Meanwhile, Paul continued to investigate Victoria and her sisters. He discovered that the 4 women had a complex history. They had grown up in different orphanages after being removed from troubled foster families. This traumatic past had united them in a kind of distorted survival pact. They saw the world as a hostile place and believed the only way to ensure security was through control and manipulation. Paul also discovered something more recent. Victoria had made significant withdrawals from the joint accounts she had with Michael. Large sums transferred to accounts in third-party names. She was preparing to flee. Michael informed Mr. Miller immediately. The lawyer obtained an order to freeze the accounts. Victoria would not be able to move any more money. This would infuriate her, but it would also leave her vulnerable. On the day of the exhumation, Michael did not go to the cemetery. He couldn't bear it. He stayed in the apartment with Gabriel, playing with the boy, trying to keep busy. Eleanor prayed in her room. Elsa prepared lunch in the kitchen. It was a day of agonizing waiting. Mr. Miller called late in the afternoon. The preliminary results of the new tests confirmed the suspicions. Mary had been poisoned gradually and intentionally. The criminal investigation would be officially reopened, and Victoria would be summoned for questioning. Michael hung up the phone and stood there, in the middle of the living room, feeling the weight of that confirmation. Mary didn't have to die. Gabriel didn't have to grow up without a mother. Everything could have been different if it weren't for Victoria. The next morning, 2 police officers went to the mansion to serve Victoria with a summons. She received them with surprise and indignation. When she learned what it was about, she tried to maintain her composure, but was visibly shaken. She was taken to the police station for questioning. During the interrogation, Victoria denied everything. She said she barely knew Mary, that she had only helped a few times out of solidarity, that she would never do something so terrible. But the investigators had evidence, records of substance purchases, messages exchanged with her sisters, witness accounts of her preparing food for Mary. Confronted with the evidence, Victoria changed her strategy. She began to cry, to play the victim, to say she was misunderstood, that she was being unjustly accused. But the lead detective, Detective Amanda Rodriguez, was experienced. She had dealt with manipulators before and was not fooled. Victoria was temporarily released, but with a restraining order not to approach Michael, Eleanor, or Gabriel. Her passport was also confiscated. She left the station with a grim face, her eyes filled with contained fury. Michael learned everything through Mr. Miller. The lawyer advised him to double the security. Victoria was cornered, and cornered people could do unpredictable things. That night, Michael was in the apartment when he received a call from an unknown number. He hesitated, but answered. It was Julia, Victoria's sister, who had been involved with Richard. Julia said she needed to talk to him in person, that she had important information. Michael was suspicious. It could be a trap. But Julia insisted, saying she wanted to redeem herself, that she no longer agreed with what her sisters were doing, that she was afraid of what Victoria might do. Michael consulted Mr. Miller and Paul. They decided to accept the meeting, but with all precautions. It would be in a public place during the day, with Paul and a private security guard watching from a distance. The meeting was set for a cafe on Madison Avenue. Julia arrived on time. She was a fragile-looking woman with short blonde hair and light eyes. She seemed frightened. Michael sat across from her. Julia began to speak quickly, as if afraid of losing her courage. She said the 4 sisters had made a pact years ago. They would support each other, use their talents, to ensure financial security and not depend on anyone. At first, it was just about protecting themselves, but over time, especially under the influence of Victoria, who was the smartest and the coldest, it turned into something darker. Julia said she deeply regretted involving Richard, that she genuinely liked him, but Victoria pressured her to use the relationship to get to Michael. Julia confessed that she had always known about Victoria's plan with Mary, but didn't have the courage to report it. She was afraid of her sister, afraid of the consequences. Michael listened in silence, controlling the anger he felt. Julia continued, She said that now Victoria was desperate, that she had lost control of the situation and was planning something. Julia didn't know exactly what, but she knew her sister well enough to know it would be dangerous. Michael asked if Julia would be willing to testify against Victoria. Julia hesitated. She said yes, but she would need protection. Michael assured her he would provide it. He called Mr. Miller and explained the situation. The lawyer said he would contact the lead detective and arrange everything. Julia left the cafe escorted by Paul and the security guard. Michael sat there processing everything. He was exhausted, physically and emotionally exhausted, but he knew he couldn't give up now. He was close to ending this nightmare once and for all. In the following days, the investigation progressed rapidly. With Julia's testimony, new details emerged. Messages were recovered, financial transactions were traced, witnesses were located. The net was closing in on Victoria. She, realizing this, became increasingly erratic. She tried to contact Michael several times, sending threatening messages, then pleading ones, then accusatory ones. Michael didn't answer any of them. He followed his lawyer's instructions. Richard, who was in psychological treatment and recovering, was also called to testify. He told everything he knew, admitted his part in the story, and formally apologized to Michael. The relationship between the two brothers, though shaken, was slowly being rebuilt. One afternoon, Michael was in the apartment playing with Gabriel when he received an urgent call from Paul. Victoria had disappeared. She wasn't at the mansion, wasn't answering her phone. No one knew where she was. Paul suspected she might be planning an escape or something worse. Michael immediately alerted the building's security. He asked them to double their vigilance. He also notified Detective Rodriguez, who issued a search warrant. Michael wouldn't rest easy until he knew where Victoria was. 2 hours later, Paul called again. Victoria had been located. She was at a hotel near JFK Airport. Apparently, she was planning to leave the country using false documents. The police were already on their way. Michael breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, this nightmare was coming to an end. Victoria was arrested at the hotel. When confronted, she completely lost her composure. She screamed, accused everyone of conspiring against her, threatened to sue them all. But there was no escape. The evidence was solid. Julia's testimony, the evidence of Mary's poisoning, the records of emotional manipulation against Eleanor and Gabriel, it was all documented. Preventive detention was ordered. Victoria would be tried for multiple crimes. Julia, in exchange for her cooperation, would receive a reduced sentence. The other two sisters, Patricia and Renee, were also located and interrogated. They were involved in similar schemes in other cities. Michael followed everything through Mr. Miller. Finally, he could breathe. Victoria was no longer a threat. His mother was safe. Gabriel was safe. The truth about Mary had been revealed, but the pain didn't disappear overnight. Michael knew it would take time to process everything, to heal, to forgive himself. But now at least he had clarity. He had truth, and he had his family. In the apartment on the Upper West Side, Eleanor was recovering more each day. She started smiling again, cooking, and taking care of her grandson with joy. Gabriel was flourishing. He talked more, laughed more, played without fear. The nanny commented that he seemed like a completely different child. Michael drastically reduced his work hours. He delegated responsibilities, hired a trusted manager, and reorganized his priorities. He realized that professional success was meaningless if he wasn't present in the lives of the people he loved. Richard was also doing better. He attended therapy regularly, got a modest but honest job, and was rebuilding his life. He and Michael saw each other frequently. The relationship between the brothers, though scarred, was more honest now, more real. Victoria's trial was set for a few months later. Mr. Miller assured him the case was solid and a conviction was almost certain. Michael knew he would have to relive everything during the trial, but he was prepared. He would do it for Mary, for Gabriel, for his mother, for himself. One evening, after putting Gabriel to bed, Michael sat on the apartment balcony. The city stretched out before him, with its lights, its sounds, its pulsating life. He thought about everything that had happened, how his life had been turned upside down, how he had almost lost everything. But now, looking at the starry New York sky, he felt something different. He felt hope. He felt that, despite everything, there was still time to rebuild, to be the father Gabriel deserved, to be the son Eleanor always had, to be the man Mary would have been proud of. Michael took a deep breath and smiled. For the first time in a long time, he truly smiled. The nightmare was ending, and a new life was beginning. The following months brought a new routine for Michael and his family. The apartment on the Upper West Side, which was initially just a temporary refuge, transformed into a real home. Eleanor had decorated the living room with old photographs, plants, and light curtains that let the sun in. Gabriel got a colorful room full of toys, where he spent hours building block towers and drawing with crayons. Michael woke up early every day, but now it wasn't to rush to the office. It was to have breakfast with his mother and son, to hear Gabriel chatter about his funny dreams, to talk with Eleanor about the day's plans. Those simple mornings had become the most important part of his routine. Work continued, of course, but Michael had learned to delegate, to trust his team, to understand that his constant presence was not synonymous with success. His business continued to prosper, perhaps even more than before, because now he made decisions with a clearer mind and a lighter heart. Richard came, by at least twice a week. He brought sweets for Gabriel, had dinner with the family, and talked with Eleanor about old recipes she liked to make. The relationship between the brothers was being rebuilt on more solid ground. Michael had forgiven Richard completely. He understood that they had both been victims of manipulation, and now together they were stronger. Victoria's trial took place on a cold September morning. The Manhattan criminal courthouse was bustling, with lawyers, witnesses, journalists, and curious onlookers circulating in the corridors. Michael arrived accompanied by Mr. Miller, dressed in a discreet suit, trying to maintain his composure. Eleanor had insisted on coming too. She said she needed to look that woman in the eye one last time. She needed to see her answer for everything she had done. Michael tried to dissuade her, worried about the emotional impact, but his mother was adamant. She was stronger now, ready to face it. Richard was also called to testify. He was nervous, but determined to tell the truth. Julia, Victoria's sister, who cooperated with the justice system, was also present. She would be a key witness. When Victoria entered the courtroom, Michael felt a tightness in his chest. She looked different. Thin, pale, her hair tied back messily, no makeup, wearing a simple outfit. The woman who had always prized her impeccable appearance now looked like a mere shadow of her former self. Her eyes swept the room and met Michael's. For a brief moment there was something there. Anger, regret, desperation. It was hard to say, but Michael didn't look away. He stared at her firmly, without fear. There was no more power in those eyes that had once deceived him. The judge, Judge Franklin Adams, a man in his 50s with a serious demeanor and a deep voice, opened the session. The charges were read: intentional poisoning resulting in death, emotional manipulation, fraud, embezzlement. The list was long. The prosecutor, Claudia Santos, presented the evidence methodically. Toxicology reports, purchase records, recovered messages, witness testimonies. Each piece of the puzzle was laid out before the judge and jury. The room fell into absolute silence as the truth was exposed. When it was Eleanor's turn to testify, she stood up slowly. Michael accompanied her to the stand. His mother was trembling slightly, but her voice came out firm. She told everything: the months of suffering, the fear, the humiliations, the anguish of seeing her grandson neglected. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, but she didn't stop. She needed everyone to know. Victoria remained impassive during the testimony, but Michael saw her hands clenched tightly on the table. He saw her jaw locked. She was angry, not remorseful. Angry. Richard testified next. He told how he was manipulated, how he was used as a bridge for Victoria to get to Michael. His voice broke several times, but he managed to finish. When he returned to his seat, Michael squeezed his shoulder in support. Julia was the most impactful witness. She detailed the plan the sisters had hatched, how they identified targets, how they approached them, how they manipulated feelings and situations. She spoke about Mary, about how Victoria spent months planning, preparing, and executing a cold and calculated plan. Victoria's defense tried to discredit Julia, claiming she was lying in exchange for benefits, but the evidence corroborated every word. There was too much proof, too many documents, too many witnesses. When Victoria finally had the chance to speak, she stood up. Her defense attorney advised her to remain silent, but she ignored him. She looked at Michael and began to speak. Her voice was laden with bitterness. She said that nothing she did was without reason, that life had taught her that affection doesn't pay bills, that love doesn't guarantee a roof over your head, that people use each other all the time. She was just honest about it. She said Michael was naive, that he lived in a world of privilege and never understood what it was to need to survive. The room fell silent. Michael listened without interrupting. When she finished, he felt pity, not for her situation, but for the emptiness inside that woman, for how she had become so twisted that she could no longer see beyond control and manipulation. The judge called for order. The prosecutor made her closing arguments, reinforcing the gravity of the acts. The defense attorney tried one last gambit, claiming psychological disorders, a history of trauma. But it was too late. The jury retired to deliberate. The wait was agonizing. Michael, Eleanor, and Richard waited in silence. Mr. Miller spoke quietly on the phone, handling final details. Julia was in another room under protection. 2 hours later, the jury returned. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all charges. The sentence would be announced in a few days, but everyone knew it would be severe. When the judge banged the gavel, Victoria closed her eyes. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time, she looked truly defeated. The officers led her out of the room. She didn't look back. Michael hugged his mother. Eleanor cried, but they were tears of relief. Richard joined the hug. The three of them stood there, united, feeling the weight of everything finally being lifted. Outside the courthouse, journalists tried to approach Michael for comments. Mr. Miller made a brief official statement. Michael didn't want to talk. There was nothing to say. This wasn't about revenge or victory. It was about justice, about truth, about protection. In the following days, the sentence was announced. Victoria would receive many years of imprisonment. Julia, for her cooperation, received a reduced sentence and would serve it under probation. The other two sisters, Patricia and Renee, were also convicted in their respective cases. Michael no longer followed the developments. He didn't want to know where Victoria was, how she was, what she was doing. That chapter was closed. It was time to look forward. And that's exactly what he did. A few weeks after the trial, Michael made an important decision. He would sell the mansion where so many bad things had happened. He would use the money to buy a new house in a quiet neighborhood with a yard for Gabriel to play in and a garden for Eleanor to tend. A place with no dark memories, a place to truly start over. He found the perfect house in a gated community in Westchester County, just outside New York City. It was a spacious, single-story house with lots of natural light and a beautiful green area. Gabriel was delighted when they first visited. He ran through the garden, shouting with joy. Eleanor smiled, seeing her grandson so happy. The move happened on a sunny November weekend. Richard helped carry boxes. Elsa organized the new kitchen. Gabriel's nanny set up the boys' room with care. And slowly that empty house transformed into a home full of life. On the first night in the new house, Michael made a simple dinner for the family. Nothing elaborate, just pasta, with sauce, salad, and garlic bread. But the table was full. Eleanor, Gabriel, Richard, Elsa, the nanny, Paul, and even Mr. Miller showed up to celebrate. It was a light-hearted evening, full of laughter, funny stories, and plans for the future. Gabriel fell asleep on the sofa after eating too much. Eleanor covered him with a blanket and stood there, admiring her grandson sleeping peacefully. Michael looked around. He looked at the people who had stood by him in the most difficult times. He felt immense gratitude. He raised his wine glass and made a toast. To new beginnings, to family, to the love that overcomes everything. Everyone raised their glasses and toasted together. The months that followed were ones of healing. Michael started therapy. He needed to process everything that had happened. deal with the guilt he still carried, and learn to forgive himself. The psychologist, Dr. Fernandez, was patient and attentive. She helped him understand that he couldn't have predicted it, that he did the best he could with the information he had, that what mattered was how he reacted when he discovered the truth. Eleanor also went to therapy. She was recovering well physically, but the emotional scars were still there. With time and proper treatment, she returned to being the strong, cheerful woman she had always been. She went back to cooking her special dishes, planting her flowers, and telling stories to Gabriel before bed. Gabriel grew up healthy and happy. He was attending a preschool near their home, where he made several friends. He was a communicative, affectionate child, full of energy. Michael would watch him play in the garden and feel his heart warm. His son was okay. Despite everything, he was okay. Richard got a better job and was thinking about going back to school. He visited the family regularly and had become a present and loving uncle. Gabriel loved it when Uncle Richard arrived, always with a new game or a crazy story to tell. One afternoon, Michael was in the garden with Gabriel when his cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. He hesitated but answered. On the other end, a kind female voice introduced herself as Dr. Beatrice, the social worker from the hospital. She was calling to see how they were. Michael smiled. He said they were fine, very well. He told her about the new house, about Eleanor's recovery, about how Gabriel was growing up happy. Dr. Beatrice was moved. She said it was gratifying to see a case with a happy ending, that she was rooting for them. Michael thanked her for everything she had done, for believing in them, for helping to protect his family. Dr. Beatrice said goodbye, wishing them all the best. Michael put the phone away and went back to playing with Gabriel. In December, Michael organized a Christmas party at the new house. He invited everyone who had been important during that difficult period. Paul and his wife, Mr. Miller and his family, Dr. Beatrice. Even Julia was invited. She was rebuilding her life, working honestly, trying to redeem herself. The house was full of people, Christmas decorations, food, and music. Gabriel received so many presents he didn't know where to start. Eleanor was radiant, greeting everyone with warm hugs. During dinner, Michael asked for everyone's attention. He stood up with Gabriel in his lap and gave an emotional speech. He thanked each person present. He said that a few months ago he was lost, blind, sinking in a lie. But thanks to his mother's love, the persistence of his friends, and the justice of serious professionals, he managed to wake up in time. He said he had learned hard lessons, that professional success means nothing without family, that trust must be earned, not given blindly, that being present is more important than any signed contract, and that, above all, true love overcomes any manipulation. Everyone applauded. Eleanor cried with emotion. Richard hugged his brother. Gabriel, not quite understanding the speech, clapped his little hands, imitating the adults. It was a special Christmas, a Christmas of rebirth. At the beginning of the new year, Michael did one last thing he needed to do. He went to the cemetery where Mary was. He had avoided going since the whole truth came out. He was afraid he couldn't handle the pain, but now he was ready. He knelt before the headstone. He cleaned the leaves that had fallen on the marble. He placed fresh flowers, and he talked to her. He apologized for not having realized, for not having protected her, for letting that woman come in and destroy everything. But he also promised that he would take care of Gabriel, that he would raise him with love, attention, and presence, that he would tell stories about her, about how amazing she was, how loving she was, how she would have been a wonderful mother. Gabriel would grow up knowing Mary, even if not through memories, but through the stories that Michael and Eleanor would tell. He stayed there for an hour, talking, crying, saying a true goodbye for the first time. When he stood up, he felt lighter. As if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, life went on, and every day it got a little better. Michael reduced his workload even more. He started picking Gabriel up from school every day. He had lunch at home with Eleanor. On weekends, he took his son to the park, to the movies, to the beach. He was creating memories, good, happy memories that one day Gabriel would remember and smile. Eleanor started attending her church's craft group again. She made new friends. She organized afternoon teas at the new house, where her friends would gather to talk and laugh. She was alive again, whole. Richard met a kind young woman named Camille. She was a teacher, liked literature, and had a sweet smile. Richard was in love, and for the first time, in a healthy relationship. He brought Camille to meet the family, and everyone loved her. Gabriel called her Aunt Cammy. One sunny Saturday in March, Michael was in the yard playing with soap bubbles with Gabriel when the boy, between laughs, said something that made Michael's heart stop. Gabriel said he was happy, that he liked this house, that he liked playing with his daddy every day. Michael knelt and hugged his son. Tears streamed down his face, tears of gratitude, of relief, of love. Gabriel returned the hug with his little kid strength. In that moment, Michael knew it had all been worth it. That all the pain, all the struggle, all the anguish had been worth it, because now finally they were okay, they were safe, they were happy. The story of Michael, Eleanor, and Gabriel was not a perfect story. It was a story of mistakes, of pain, of manipulation and deceit. But it was also a story of new beginnings, of courage, of a love that endures and strengthens in the face of adversity. It was a real story, human, and above all, hopeful. Because in the end, what mattered wasn't what they had lost. It was what they had gained, a united family, a true home, and the certainty that together they could face any storm. The sun shone brightly that March afternoon. Gabriel laughed as he chased the colorful bubbles floating through the air. Eleanor watched from the window, smiling. Richard arrived with Camille, bringing a cake for their afternoon snack. And Michael, looking at it all, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, complete and true peace. The pain turned into memory, the trauma turned into strength, and the family was reborn, far from the shadows, illuminated by the sun of a new day. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Michael, Eleanor, and Gabriel has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of new beginnings, of overcome pain, and of love that endures everything, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most. What was the moment that touched you the most? Have you ever experienced a situation of emotional manipulation? How did you handle it? We want to hear your story too. Every day, we bring intense stories like this that reveal the deepest side of the human soul. Stories that make us reflect on family, love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. You are not alone on this journey. We are here every day with a new story that can inspire you, comfort you, or make you see life in a different way. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with more emotion, more drama, and more stories that touch the soul.